maru pa io so au mea so. E mula mo se pa io le so. O sa mo tō maru e le mawhatau lima ima i lo le tawata. Ai tō oto whangara whati i o tō pa ia. A wā pa ia mene matanga e o i le ngataama. Ai o le a sunu tonu le lau le fō. E pei o ne eile whamoe me tūra le fiafi. O te tūlai fo i mara whaitete mara whaaloaro. O wā o sa mō le atunu o mona tofi. Sa mō le fue lawe lawe. Sa mō fo i o le iai EVP. Le rau te mole atunu nganga whawhatai mara whamaro le problema. Ia e meise maru le nofo a tofi o le National Center of Peace and Conflict Studies. I le University of Maurunga o Taru. He mole atunu nganga whawhatai mara whamaro. This evening I wanted to preface my remarks in the language of my inheritance. And as a Samoan and custodian of the Waiwai Manamaro chief title in the village of Samoa in Samoa, the oratory dialogue pays respects and gives reverence to my ancestors of the past, my responsibilities of the present, and the impeding obligations that informs my future. In doing so, there is a parallel relationship between my responsibilities and obligations as a Samoan with the theme of the National Center of Peace and Conflict's 10-year celebration. What a wonderful achievement it is to celebrate 10 years. The irony is it will be exactly 1 year this Saturday. I was thinking about it today that I completed and graduated with my PhD. And so here I am standing delivering this lecture. Today's lecture is entitled as Reconceptualizing Peace and Conflict Theory as an ideology towards understanding domestic violence in Samoa. My current research focuses on how can peace and conflict theories inform social issues experienced in Pacific Island countries. Also other research efforts are around decolonizing and deconstructing peace and conflict theory in relationship to indigenous ideologies and philosophies, reconceptualizing and decolonizing Skoltong's structural and cultural violence theories, and also research around indigenous conflict resolution and peace-building practices in the Pacific. In doing so, I have split my lecture into 3 sections. The first, and sort of like aligning with the theme of this year's celebrations, peace, past, present, and future. So from a past perspective, I will look at applying past peace and conflict theories, such as Galton's topology of violence, Dugan's nested theory of conflict, and Lerrock's nested time paradigm, and how that has informed the current or present issue, in this case is domestic violence in Samoa, and for the future, how can we develop the development of a model that I'm currently working on, which is I've labeled the 3R model. So the peace and conflict theory, Johann Galton is widely considered as the father of peace building. And he developed the theory, and I'll cover this a little bit more, of around violence, more specifically direct violence, structural violence, and cultural violence. Dugan also expanded on this theory, and we'll talk a little bit about her perspective on this nested theory of conflict. John Paul Lederock is also a well-known peace and conflict theorist, and he expanded on Dugan's nested theory of conflict and developed a nested time paradigm theory around reconciliation and peace building. So I just wanted to quickly go over these theories just to provide some context, and just want to preface that the issue of domestic violence will be examined through these theoretical lenses. So as Galton argues, he expanded the notion of violence to direct violence to include cultural violence and structural violence. So direct violence, as we know, is the physical behavior or the manifestations of violence that we see a lot, we see on a day-to-day basis. And he articulated the difference between direct violence as being very visible and the cultural and structural violence as being invisible. They're invisible because structural violence Are the institutions, whether it be formal or informal, that that justifies or normalizes direct violence. Cultural violence, he expanded to suggest that there are ideologies or way of thinking that also normalizes and camouflages the manifestations of direct violence. In doing so, that's why he argues that that's why it is invisible versus direct violence as being visible. Dugan's nested theory of conflict suggests that a conflict is not just a one sort of specific issue, it's actually embedded or nested in a complex system. She split them up into these four categories. That there is an issue specific, that conflicts are relational, but they also belong to a very complex structural system, be a subsystem or system in itself. And I'll tie this in as we continue on with the lecture. And so, for example, these are just some of the explanations of Dugan's nested theory of conflict. Issue-specific are the most simplest forms and frequent forms of conflict. From a relational perspective, that all conflicts have this interaction, these patterns of interactions, and then the subsystems is built into the social system, and then the substructural system is a much broader system, bringing inequalities such as racism, sexism, classism, homophobia, and so forth. And I'll again expand on these definitions as we apply them to the domestic violence problem in Samoa. What Lederock argues, so he built on the nested theories of conflict. He suggested that, look, it's really good to have an understanding of where conflicts fit and identifying what stages do they belong to. But when we talk about peace building, when we talk about reconciliation and future planning, it is really important to put into place timeframes. So, for example, from his perspective, there is the crisis intervention. He suggested that should be at least 2 to 6 months. Once we have this crisis intervention, we need to start preparing and training people, short-range planning, and he suggests that's 1 to 2 years. Then he moves on to much longer sort of timeframes of decade thinking, and then generational thinking, which is 20 plus years. So in order for reconciliation to be sustainable, according to Lederock, we need to ensure that we have these timeframes in place in order to measure the progress of our reconciliation and peace building. Okay, and that's just a brief explanation of the model. So, domestic violence in Samoa. So this is from a recent report that was given out last year. And during the time of my research, there were 723 reported cases, and I highlighted reported in red because one of the issues that Samoa has is underreporting. And at the time of the research, the police and the legal mechanism, the instruments that were there to measure or to collect the data for domestic violence issues in Samoa weren't really, they didn't really have a strong system to determine how many cases during that period. And so at the time of the research, there were 723. My assumption is there was probably way more than this statistic. From this report, they tallied up the data. One of the biggest issues in Samoa right now is verbal violence, sexual violence, and incest. There are also new sort of social issues impacting Samoan society. That is of child prostitution, pornography, and prostitution in general. And that's fairly new for Samoa as a society to deal with. And I'm not sure if they have mechanisms in place to try and help and try and address these social issues. There are also violence towards non-biological children. So these are the children that come from families from the different islands, and they come to families who are sort of located close into the township for schools, so they can go to school, go to work. And many of these children are not really treated the same as the biological children. So there's a lot of violence towards these children. And then obviously with a lot of the stresses in Samoa, especially when it comes to money and so forth, a lot of the violence is born out of frustration, and I'll cover that later on in the slides. There's also violence towards a particular group of people in Samoa, and this is the Nofotani. These are the female married women who are married into the husband's family. They tend to have traditional ideologies around them and stigmas around these women, as being they're the ones who do all the work. Some have called them sort of modern day slaves. Some have called them second-class citizens. And so we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Intimate partner violence is also on the increase. And these are some of the statistics that have come out from an IPV perspective. One of the issues that Samoa is having is the participation of women in Parliament. And there's a quota that's been set for at least 5 people to be, 5 women, 5 seats that have been vacated for women in Parliament. There are also issues within the village governance, within the village itself. 11% of all women are Samoa, are Matai. However, there are villages in Samoa that still do not allow women to hold chief titles. Although some of these women are women who are Matais, they're recognised as Matai holders, many of them do not sit in the village council. Again, because of the stigmas and ideology around the status of women, that they have certain responsibilities that they need to attend to. The women involvement in the whānau or the village council is not one of them.